Hi, Nico. Hi, Joe. Hi, Bernice. Hi, Heather. Hi,
Hello.
Nick. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm kind of shaggy at the moment. Hair is like as long as think
Yeah,
I've ever had it. But
all got locked
yeah,
down at the moment. Now, are you able to switch your?
let me see. I'm gonna try to switch up the. Let me see here. I guess I can turn it sideways like this, and hopefully. Sorry, I have to like set
That's
up like
fine.
multiple tripods over here.
Don't worry. You've got lots of comments coming through while you do that. There you are. People are calling you a hippie. Heather Hilda says hi. Bernice says hi. Welcome, welcome. Hi, everyone. So, a quick bit of housekeeping before we kick off. Um, just to let everyone know to drop down the comments because they will be scrolling over Nicola's face. You can just tap your screen once. And after the live, we'll be saving this to our IGTV account there. So you'll be able to find that afterwards. It'll also be on our website. So, yeah, I think that's it for the housekeeping. Keep the comments coming and any questions as we go. But we've got lots to get through. We've got loads of questions. Is it fine for me to call you Nick? Nicola, what would you prefer?
Yeah, Nick is good.
Nick's
Nick
cool.
is good.
Okay. So I guess it'd be great to start with a bit about you and your background. I understand you started calligraphy around the same time as me in 2014, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
I think it was like
yeah,
November-ish.
yeah. And what
Yeah.
got you into calligraphy? What started your journey?
So in late uh in 2013, I left my job of like 8 years, and I originally thought that I was gonna go travel for a bit and just kind of try to figure out something else. But I ended up getting into an accident, so I ended up breaking my right hand in a bunch of places. I had a lot of damage to my fingers, especially
I,
because these two got bent back.
uh-huh.
Um, so I basically started doing calligraphy because I needed to relearn how to use my hand.
Yeah.
It was
Wow.
my dumb hand. Um,
What script did you start with to be rehabilitating?
so I started doing italic to
Uh-huh.
begin with. I had old teaching materials. My mom actually had tried to get me to do calligraphy when I was in middle school,
Mhm.
but it didn't really take. I think I was young.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I was kind of digging through my desk and I found that, and I figured that if I was going to need to relearn how to write anyway, I figured I might as well
Yeah.
try to do. So it's funny because like my handwriting now, like my normal everyday handwriting, still looks like crap.
That's same. I haven't even had an accident excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say crap. I mean, like it kind of depends. It's normal everyday handwriting is scribbly,
Yeah.
but uh, I had to fill out lots of requisition forms and order forms, so I always just printed, and I guess I kind of revert back to that if I need to, have somebody read it and be able to understand what I'm doing. But
So do you think
yeah,
this rehabilitation of calligraphy would be a physio endorsed activity or a doctor endorsed? It's obviously worked really well for you. So, well done on getting that back.
yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say that it is really good in terms of learning fine muscle control again. It I think I'm not really sure how it would have happened another way, but I feel like when we first begin, it's especially if you begin and you dive into classic calligraphy and you have lots of good exemplar to look at, then it is super duper frustrating. I think everybody goes through that phase where it's super duper frustrating to like
Yeah.
try to make yours look something passable.
Mhm.
And I feel like for me, like that phase was probably a lot longer than most people
Okay.
because yeah. But in terms of like, would it work? I think it would. I think the toughest thing when you have like nerve or tendon damage is that you have to you have to use those tendons and those muscles as much as you can within usually about a 20-month window, I think is what they said.
Right.
Because otherwise what happens is scar tissue begins filling up the spaces.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was very good to be able to have something disciplined that you could do every single day. And so I mean, I started posting, calligraphic stuff, I guess, on Facebook and stuff like that. Mostly because I didn't think anybody visited my page. Obviously, I was just doing it so that I would have like a record of stuff to look at,
And people can see your work now. You've got 2 accounts, but your at Entropy Inc. is the one that you're talking to us now. That's your one.
Yeah.
And
so at Entropy Inc. is the account that my calligraphic stuff, or most of it, ends up on.
Yeah.
You go to the other account, you'll see lots and lots of fountain pens, which is something that I'm into, and we're probably not going to go through a whole lot of that today.
I think we're our hands full talking about nibs.
Well, so it's interesting because I think that I just realized I didn't even bring it out here. I should go and probably grab one, because I think that the story of nibs, the end point of that, at least as far as we've gotten, is fountain pens.
Right.
So, at least in theory, one of the things I've been fascinated with for a long, long time is, during the golden age of American handwriting, there was also extremely, extremely good fountain pens that were being made at that time. And, it's been a sort of pet side project of mine to try to have things like that made again, because I think that even though most of the fountain pens that you see nowadays are from like the kind of cursive age, that stuff that's like really, really flexible, there are fountain pens that are out there, and some of the Victorian nibs that I've laid out over here, I'll give you guys like a quick preview of all the stuff that I laid out over here. I don't have to keep staring at my ugly face. But like, so I have here a process sheet. It's missing sheet steel, but I guess you can imagine that.
Yeah.
For nibs, and then over here we end up with Victorian dip pens, and some of these are exceptionally intricate. This is actually a solid piece of mother of pearl that's actually been carved out to look like stags, and yeah, so that stuff. And then here we start getting into nibs, where you start seeing things.
Yeah.
Clearly the idea of like doing oblique stuff was was on their mind too.
Wow.
And then over here I had some other stuff to kind of show you. This is a funny little finarcle that basically turns a straight holder into a oblique holder.
Okay.
And holds any sort of nib in there. And this is one of those things I was like, it'd be cool if somebody made again, because there's so many of them.
That have you tried that and found that it works better than?
It doesn't work better than it's just it's basically just a conversion to turn a straight holder into it just turns it into an oblique.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've obviously got information there from from way back, and I'd be interested to talk a little bit about the nib making process, so that the process for making vintage nibs and how that's changed since then to now. I mean, my understanding is that the process is actually quite similar, maybe minus a few steps that they've streamlined, maybe the ones that can crush people's hands and stuff. I'm not sure.
So that's a good question. I would say that the process of making nibs it has definitely advanced, and that alone, when I saw that question on your email, that alone could be a question that we could spend hours answering if you want to get into the minutia of. But most of it is probably here's the quick and dirty version of it. The quick and dirty version of it is that you have this, which goes over the steps. So you start off with sheet metal. I'm sorry, this is quite old, so some of these pieces are really rusted and stuff, but they're so hard to find anyway. You start off with a piece of sheet steel. This is just the scrap after they punch out, right? And all this stuff that's going on over here is still the same thing, more or less, that's happening. You know, then they pierce it. It's marked, which is to say that they actually stamp on the logo. The slitting process, this is extremely difficult to do, and this is actually, back in the day, this was done by hand on well, when I say back in the day, I mean Esterbrook was one of the companies that really started mechanizing stuff because of Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. But this process used to be done by hand, and it's crazy dangerous because you're dealing with a saw that is, you know, like a hair sort of width, and you're, you know, sitting there examining it, finishing it. Finishing, in my understanding, is where chrome, they're plating it.
Okay.
And then you have, you know, sort of different stages here in terms of like sort of checking it and grinding it. Now this last part over here, where I don't think the phone is actually good enough to actually show. Oh no, you can kind of see it. And sorry, these examples are really rusty. Is that as they're going through here, they're actually applying grinds by hand to the different parts of the nib. The last part being the underside of it, the smooth side that you end up writing with. And the key difference that I see in terms of nibs from the late 1800s through about maybe 1920s or so, and today, is that the early nibs, the grinding
Hi. I'm not sure if my connection, Instagram, you, whatever, but it may happen again. So we'll just keep going.
It's fine.
You were right at a moment of saying exactly what the difference was.
So the big difference is that the types of metal that were being used back then, metallurgy has gotten much better over the course of the last 100+ years. So one of the things that you see with a lot of the nibs nowadays is that even you know, quote unquote cheap nibs, and I guess there really are not that many. That, like, what's the Leonard Principle EF is like the most expensive current nib that's out there, insofar as I understand, not counting like the weird musical nibs and stuff like that are out, but that one's widely used. And you know, the if we go to the opposite end of the spectrum there, then, you know, we look at the really cheap nibs, and what I would consider like a cheap nib nowadays is something like, you know, for some reason you can get Zebra Gs insanely cheaply if you buy in enough quantity now. I believe that I was able to get them for, like, the last time I ordered in quantity, I think I got them for like under $0.25 a piece or something like that. I mean, you have to order, like, you know, you have to order like 400 or 500 of them or something like that at a time, but they're really inexpensive. But I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, if you consider a nib that costs $0.25 versus the Leonard Principle that costs, you know, wholesale probably around $1.50 or so, you know, that's a 6x price increase between those two wholesale prices. The Leonard Principle, the metal that's being used in it is, you know, obviously at a high-end nib, you would imagine that the metal in there is going to be very good. The metal that's being used even in cheap nibs now is very good, and that is not true when you go back in the day. So, you know, one of the things that I would say has changed a lot is that, you know, the metal is actually better just across the board in most nibs.
That so does that mean that they're more likely to last longer, or is it?
Yeah,
You know,
they last longer. They last longer. Believe it or not, they're actually most nibs nowadays are actually more corrosion resistant than the stuff that, I mean, you can tell just from the nibs I showed you, they're all rusted and stuff like that. And I have, you know, I've had I guess I'm known within the calligraphy community for having some obscene amount of nibs, because I gave up counting after like 4 million, but like but you know,
and you store vintage nibs as well, don't you? So is that restoration process the removal
no,
of the rust?
so the restoration, so that was an interesting question. I wanted to answer that live for you. When I said that I restore vintage nibs,
Yeah,
I don't restore vintage like
nibs.
steel nibs.
Yeah.
What I'm restoring that would be worth the time is something like this. So that is, you know, so I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's not to say it couldn't kind of be done, but it would not be worth the cost because of the amount of time that's put into it. You know, just pay your $250 and get another nib. You know, and often they cost a lot less than that.
To see what the benefits were.
But the nib restoration that I'm doing, I actually brought out some of the tools, are that you will end up, unfortunately, when I missed the appointment last time, it sucked. I was actually hoping, because I had a client's nib that, like one of these, that I was actually fixing at the time. So I was like, I can actually show you how it's done. But cool. So these are different burnishers, and this is actually probably the most useful one, which is just a bamboo chopstick that I use. And you're using, you know, this type of block. There's actually several of them. This is the one that was easiest to move around for me because it's plastic. It's the last step. But there are metal ones as well. They're, you know, harder. And so what you do is, a lot of the times the same problems that occur with our dip nibs over time occur with these sort of things, and fountain pen nibs, and these are very much like fountain pen nibs. And so what ends up happening is that in order, you know, where you either have tines crossing or you have them sprung. And springing is usually more what happens, right? Because we use them and then they just kind of lose their flex. And actually what is actually happening is that, you know, most people think that it's because this tine part, this long tine part, is getting bent. And that's not really always, that's usually not the case. Actually, what's happening is these are called the shoulders, these edges over here. And it's actually that these shoulders are actually becoming deformed. And a good example of what I'm talking about is, have you ever like had a nib holder that the flange was just kind of, it was too tight and you tried to shove a nib in there and then the nib goes, right? Yeah, it deformed it. So that kind of shows you how the cylindrical, you know, nature of the nib and the shoulders affect the tine alignment. And so fixing that is a matter of using something like this. It works a lot better on gold than it does on on steel.
On steel, yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So it's one of those things where I think that, you know, I've done it before where, you know, you have an old nib. Usually it's not used. It's like a factory defect or something, or it just got jostled inside of the box and, you know, something happens to it, and you can fix them doing that. But yeah, you know, would I recommend you do it or anybody else? Like, it's kind of fun, but to get the tools to do it is pretty impractical, because you're realistically talking about fixing a, you know, $1 or $2 thing. It's really,
no, that's fine. That question. Yeah. This does leave your last recent comment actually about all the nibs. Leads me into the fact that, you know, say for example, I've recently found a very nice beautiful nib that works so well for Spencerian and so well for copperplate. It's a vintage nib that I picked up years ago. I have no idea where I got it from.
It was a Mitchell maple pen.
Mitchell maple. And now I can't find it because do you have all the Mitchell maple pens?
Okay, so
No,
I was shocked when I saw that because I wanted to reply like send me a picture of it or something, because I actually do not. I actually have never even seen a maple pen, so I would be fascinated to
Right.
know what that even looks like. That said, what I do have a lot of is I have tons and tons of American nibs.
Yeah.
And America, but in the United States. But you know, over time, I've tried to kind of collect some of the other ones that were, you know, European made. I do have a lot of French now that I think about it, but oh, looks like your video cutting in and out again. No, it's all good. I think it's okay now.
Yes. Sorry, I'm just at this nib, but my question, and I don't know if because I lost you a little bit there, was how do you go about tracking down rare nibs? How would somebody, I mean, for me, I've set up Google alerts just in case people put them on eBay, but is there, you know, if there's a you know, a rare nib, is there an easy way or some secret way?
So I have some bad news for you. The bad news is that you know, eBay and this sort of thing is probably the easiest. Now in terms of Mitchell nibs, William Mitchell Company was based in England. So what is probably going to be most fruitful for you is to actually go and, you know, eBay has multiple different portals to each one of the different countries. And so you would probably do best just searching something really, your voice is, your sound is gone again, I think.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, no, now it's back. Okay, it's fine. For a second there, it wasn't good. But yeah, in my experience, it would be best for you to do a really broad search, like nibs, like vintage nibs or Mitchell nib, you know, and then just look through every single posting of that, and you just keep doing that. Okay, so it's interesting. It looks like a generic. It looks like a generic nib. I was expecting something with like a crazy maple leaf cut out or something like that. What would be most important, I think, and this video quality is not going to help me with it at all, is if you email me, close, good pictures of like the imprints on the nib. That is extremely useful. Be able to tell.
Yeah.
Looking at kind of time, you know, in general, like the key things I look for on the nib are obviously like the shape, the kind of the shape both of the nib and of the the imprint usually tells sort of like within probably a decade what time period it was made.
Okay.
So, yeah. But I can tell you that nib is not super duper old.
No.
And when I say super duper old, I mean like it's not pre-19. It's probably not made pre-1920s. I might be wrong about that, but judging by the shape, it's probably not.
I'll do a bit more research. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that was question for me. It was more generic to try and give other people an idea if they're looking for a specific nib, but hopefully it helped other people other than me.
So one of the things that actually might be interesting for you to know, and this is good for the audience members too, is that one of the reasons I got really into vintage nibs is because a lot of these companies in their heyday, they would be willing to make batches of nibs that they would custom stamp whatever you wanted onto it, as long as you ordered enough of them.
Yeah.
And so my gut feeling is that maple pen thing, that's a weird name for that's a weird name for a nib. That may be an offshot. That might be like an offshot of some other. For example, most people know now that Musselman Perfections are actually Gillot 604 EF that D.L. Musselman had specially made for the business school. So they're the same nib. Unfortunately, both are. Looks like your video is
I'm having loads
of
connection issues on this everyone viewing, and I apologize if it's a bit awkward. Because I'm having some difficulty.
I didn't hear anything that you said after difficult.
So I'm having some difficulties with the connection. So what I want to do, because I know we've only got an hour, I want to just make sure I get the questions that people have emailed in. So one is from Denisa Popa. Sorry if I've said that wrong. Are there any brands or companies that produce flexible nibs in Europe that you know of, except for Leonard, Gillett, and Browse?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
sorry,
that's fine.
your sound cuts in now too. So, are there other companies that make them? No, probably not. Those are in modern times. Those are the big companies that are, in fact, actually, Mitchell and Leonard, if I understand correctly, are actually. I may be wrong about that, but I believe that that's the case. So a lot of these companies, sort of like Hunt Speedball, sort of became they merged. But those are the only big companies that I know of that are producing nibs out of Europe right now. Yep. That said, the story of nibs comes from all over Europe anyway, particularly England. Yeah. So, you know, a lot of the best vintage nibs actually come out of, you know, European countries.
Yep.
So should be able to find those.
Yeah, I was recommending last week, I was recommending a book called The Steel Pen Trade, which talks all about the pen trade in Birmingham, you know, at the height of the trade, when I think they were supplying 75% of the world's nibs. So that was really right to read, which I'll just hold up. It is backwards, sorry, but it was called this Steel Pen Trade.
Right.
It's a really interesting one. It talks about all the steps of the process and that sort of thing. Yeah. Following on from that question from Denisa, is putting the nib into a flame a recommended method to prepare it? Or does that alter the integrity of the nib? So
it's a matter of, so my gut feeling with that is I don't do it. Unless there's like no other way, I don't do it, because flame and steel, especially since a lot of people, if you're gonna, a lot of people nowadays would use like a butane lighter. I've seen that. I've done that too. It's really not good. Butane lighters burn way, way hotter. than a wood match. You know, the real problem is that you have no ability to control the amount of heat that you're putting on it. Yeah. And in my experience, even with wood match, like for the first year or so, I was using wood matches to prep my nibs. My experience is that it lessens the life of the nib by at least a fifth.
Okay, thank you.
And
I didn't do it either. Trust myself to, like you say, it's too difficult to control it. I've probably ruined more nibs than actually began using them before I even started. So, yeah. Okay. And what would you recommend as your preferred method then?
So I see Paul Antonio is like probably yelling hooray in his chair somewhere. But yeah, I am a big fan of spit. Because you always have spit with you, you know, and saliva is quite good at dissolving oil. However, when I used to do lots and lots of invitation work, and even nowadays, I guess when I do diploma work, I usually just get like a big jar of you know 90% rubbing alcohol, and I drop like 10 nibs in there at once and just leave it for like 20 minutes.
Okay.
And that's a great way to prep a ton of nibs all at once. Other ways that I've tried that are also very good. One is the potato. I found that for whatever reason though, that yellow skinned potatoes are a lot better than russets or red potatoes. I don't know whether that's because of what's available to me, but yellow potatoes seem to work a lot better.
Okay.
And that's kind of funny. It's got to have something to do with the density of the starch and water and stuff like that in there. And that I've tried this as scientifically as I can, ruining a ton of potatoes. I've tried it, and that works well. Another one that is kind of a little weirder, but it does work very well, is if you take a nib and you dip it into gum arabic or gum water, and then you let it dry on there, and then wipe it off with water, the gum arabic sticks to everything that's on there, so it gets it extremely clean.
Okay.
But yeah.
And Paul Antonio has just said potatoes are terrible for the Gillette 303s, as they can bend the tip. So
yeah, it's definitely not very good for very fine nibs. Yeah. One of my favorite nibs is like Esterbrook 355s. Have you ever used that before? Super duper fine nib.
Okay.
And yeah, they don't work well with potatoes. Just use alcohol.
Okay. We also had a question from Mexico from Arandira, which was looking at responsible consumption, really. So there's lots of nibs in the market, and we can feel tempted to buy everything we see, but might not be the best way to go. So what would you consider to be the best criteria to make intelligent selective buying options for nibs?
Oh, so that's a big question, actually. So here's my gut feeling, and this is totally what I did anyway, is just spend, like, maybe not do it all at once, but you're never doing, since the amount of time that you spend with your nib is going to be a lot for practice, I don't think there's anything wrong, especially since nibs are rather inexpensive per piece, to over time try out a bunch of them. And that's kind of how I got into vintage nibs to begin with too. I actually tried pointed pen for a little while and hated it because I bought like some starter pack from Speedball or something, and the nibs in it were all, they were nowhere near as flexible as what I saw. And I was like, this sucks. And so I actually probably put off doing any sort of pointed pen for at least a year because of that. And what ended up happening was I met my calligraphy teacher, or my future calligraphy teacher, at a guild event, and it was for Christmas, and she gave me a small packet of, she's like, oh, like, you might want to try these these are some really old nibs that I have. And there was a couple of them in there that I just fell in love with. Like one of them was the Esterbrook 355, because I like working really small. And so, you know, I think trying lots of nibs is a good idea. That said, you can tell a lot about how a nib is going to work by the architecture of the nib. So I can, do we have enough, are there other questions, or do I have enough time to like give you a little
give us, this is the audience questions, so I'm glad I've got those done, and I can just go on with any other ones I've got. So whatever you want to do, because it was one of my questions
about Windex previously. Windex works great, Donna.
If you go.
But okay, so when we look at nibs, all right, like what you want to, the most flexible nibs are going to have eye holes that are rather wide, and they can be wide. We're talking about the widest point this way, not long-wise. They're going to be rather wide. And what I'm saying is that if you look at like Leonard Principle, that really decorative cutout makes the cross-section of it very, very wide. The other thing is that you're looking for very long tines. Really, really long tines, like something like this. So this is what's called like a spear nib. These are one of those nibs that unfortunately nobody's really making anymore. These are insanely flexible, because there's so much there's so much thin metal that is on the front of the nib to kind of splay apart, and so those things help a lot. When you have nibs that have shoulders, that like you see how this isn't anywhere near as long. The shoulders are those little are where the nib taper comes to an end over here and it becomes like a cylinder, right? When it's very, very short, those nibs are going to be very, 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 very stiff.
Okay.
All
so
right.
It's got a short shoulder.
Yeah, short shoulders are stiff. Also, there are other designs. This is one that you still see being made today. These are called tulip nibs. Tulip nibs are pretty much always inflexible. The shape of that front end makes them very, very stiff. And what they were originally designed to hold a ton of ink, which they're great at. So if you want to do a lot of like monoline lettering with something that's quite thick, like thinned acrylic or something, they're very, very good for that.
Okay. I did actually have one which was, I think was a tulip, which was called the Victor Exhibition nib, and that one actually it is quite flexible. So I've always thought them all to be flexible, that style. So that's really good to know that, you know, I don't go buying those
I mean,
all the time, because that might just be one.
It's a sort of in general thing, because because there are going to be exceptions to that. I can tell you that another nib that I have a huge quantity of, because I bought a ton of it because it's very good, is actually sort of a tulip shaped nib too. It's called the Blonsey Glory, Glore, and that's a tulip nib that's very flexible too. But you can tell because you can tell that it's going to flex some because the tulip shape is right. So kind of following that same rule again, where like if the tines are very, very long, it tends to be flexible.
That makes more sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Because the one I've got is long tines. And what I was going to say was that that a lot of the vintage nibs aren't produced anymore. So, and I've heard just in some of the chats that we've had recently, people talking about the modern nibs that sort of are comparable. Do you have any recommendations for, you know, modern nibs that compare to those vintage nibs that work so well?
So,
especially for copperplate and Spencerian.
Okay, so for copperplate and Spencerian, this is kind of interesting. What I've been able to tell is that for a lot of the stuff that was done in the past, they they were not necessarily, especially for production of specimens, they were not always using these like ultra flexible nibs. There's a lot of models of nibs that are actually in old advertisements for Spencerian that are actually, they're able to flex very wide if you need to, but it takes some pressure. But the key thing is that they're really fine, right? So I think that it's kind of it's a more modern thing nowadays, that there seems to be this sort of obsession that people have with, you know, having like the softest, you know, feather brush sort of nib possible for Spencerian. And that, to me, I think is a little bit silly, because most of the time, you know, you think about Spencerian, like most of Spencerian is like these little wispy hairlines, right? So you know, I think most people find it easier to control with that. That said, I think that for the money, the best nib that's being made right now, in my opinion, for quality control is probably Leonard Principal EF. However, they're expensive per piece. The best nib modern for the money, I think, right now is the Hunt 101. Gillot 303 is very much made the same. It's made to the same design that the 303s in the 60s were made, but with different metal. That's why it's blue. When the new Gillot is very good, it's very good. Fortunately, it seems like about 30% of them, even in the best boxes, that are kind of lemons. So, you know, that's one of the key differences, is that like nowadays there's no hand checking and it's machine ground. It's machine produced pretty much all the way through. So as a result of that, you know, you kind of get what you get, right? The big plus of vintage nibs that I like is the variety and the fact that when you get a box of 100, you know, when you get a gross of them, you typically get at least 140 good ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I the way that I see it is that even though, you know, a lot of times people are like, oh, like the new Gillot 303, it is pretty cheap, right? It's like, I think like 80 cents or something like that. It's about $1 or something, per nib. Your cost per nib is actually a little bit more than that, because if you buy, you know, in my experience, you buy 144 of them, you get a gross of them, you get about, best case scenario, you get about 100 good ones.
Okay.
So your cost is actually a little bit higher, right? But you know, it's one of those, yeah.
And you mentioned before the Esterbrook 355. We had a question of whether that one was similar to the Gillette 170.
It's not similar to the Gillot 170. It's actually Esterbrook based the 355 off of the Gillot 293 and 294, I believe, or it might be 290, 291. I forget which of those two, but they are extraordinarily small nibs. I can actually grab one over here if you want to see it. It's super duper small, but I love it because I like what over here. The Gillot 170. If you like that nib, the nib that is a copy of that nib is 356. For whoever asked that question. Yeah, so here's the
a 356, like the 170. Okay.
Yeah, the 356 is a copy of the 170. So this is how small this nib is. It's teeny tiny.
Okay.
I guess nobody can tell because I might just have huge hands. So maybe I should get a modern nib that has some around here and compare it to other people. is a... Oh, actually, this will actually be funny. So this is the super duper rare Gelat Principality. This is the original. This is the nib that the Hunt 101 and the Leonard Principal are clones of. So that is the size of an Esterbrook 355. Compared to it, it is teeny tiny compared to it. So it kind of gives you an idea of size that we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. So,
yeah,
I mean,
it's a very diminutive nib, but I work typically in X heights that are under 4. Probably the most that you can do with this nib is like a 3mm X height. So
yeah, okay,
very small.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously you use vintage nibs quite a bit in the work that you do.
Almost entirely. Yeah.
Finally. Okay, so because I personally get quite nervous about falling in love with vintage nibs. You know, you find one here, there, and then you can't find them anywhere. So, or they're quite expensive to replace.
If only you knew somebody that had millions of them.
I know. Okay.
I thought that if this was longer, it would be funny for people to see the what the nibs are like over here, but it's actually probably just really boring. But just
no, well, let's ask, because I think people were very. I mean, when you said that you had some, my first question was, where do you keep them? Show me them. So let's just see if people are interested in having a look at your collection.
I mean, it's basically like massive. You know those 100-gallon tubs that you use to move stuff with?
Yeah.
It's like a minivan worth of those stacked on each other of boxes.
Oh
my
gosh.
And for anybody who's wondering how that happened, it is because once again it kind of goes back into your whole you're afraid of running out thing. So what happened with me is that I for months kind of did what you I guess might be doing with this maple pen, and I was just trolling around on eBay and stuff like that buying it. Well, by happenstance, I got contacted by, I realized that several packages had come from one person in Florida, and, same name also in New York. So I kind of stipulated that, this was the same person. I went back and I checked, and it turned out that it was the same person. That they used the same eBay account to sell it to me. At some point I messaged him and I basically said hey, instead of paying you, $5-10 shipping each time I buy one of these boxes or whatever that you post every other 2 weeks, how many do you have? Can I just buy all of them? Right? And his response was pretty funny. His response was I don't think you have an idea how many nibs you'd be buying. And I was I was thinking that he was going to be sell me 10 gross or something. I was yeah, I could maybe do that, It turned out that he was actually somebody who had bought one of the warehouses of Esterbrook when they went out of business. So he was talking about buying, a storage unit full of nibs.
Right.
And so, so I ended up talking to him. And
you're going to need to... Can you hear me? Everyone would like to see your nibs. Can you show us the stack?
Oh man. Okay. This is gonna. You guys are gonna be so disappointed when you see just how so. Here we go.
Here we go.
So this is an absolute mess, but
sorry.
These are tubs. These are 2 of about 20 some tubs like this that are filled with boxes of nibs like this. And all of these boxes are sorted by each type of nib. So these are Spencerian 1s. There's I don't know, at least 6 gross of them in there. Something like that. This is the unsorted, sorted stuff in here. This is so basically there is this constant process of sorting for me whenever I'm bored enough. but yeah, like so that's that, and those are just the uncounted ones. The ones that are actually separated out and stuff like that are actually in small parts organizers upstairs.
Okay.
I think if I remember correctly, there's 60 of them, and each one has about 2,000 nibs in it. So it's some insane amount.
You should start a shop. I think you already do have a shop, don't you?
Yeah, I have an online. I have not listed anywhere close to all my nibs online.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because I hated taking pictures of all of them. Sitting there trying to get good pictures of all of them was awful. And I think
if you've got a captive calligraphy community, you probably don't need to do too much for selling them.
Yeah, so basically, if you I do sell nibs for those people that are interested in buying nibs from me. The best thing you can do is, email me and have a conversation about it, because usually if you tell me what sort of nibs that you like or what you're trying to do, I can give you lots and lots of recommendations for ones that work. Right.
Thank you. That'd be awesome. I did have a question. I don't know. You might have already answered my question, because you kind of went about getting the vintage nibs in a different way from me. But one of my things about the community is that people, like when we send envelopes, we might send a couple of nibs. So I've been lucky to have been gifted some really nice nibs from other calligraphers, tried and tested way, getting the right nib. I was wondering if there's been a favorite nib that somebody's gifted you, or is that question redundant because of the way that you've gotten your nibs?
So yeah, I mean, like I said, the first vintage nibs that I really fell in love with were a gift from my calligraphy teacher anyway. So that was actually the Esterbrook 355 was actually a nib that I bought tons and tons of, and that was how I met that person that I was talking about. But yeah, I have, in terms of these boxes that I was looking through, like this thing over here. Some of you have seen me at like calligraphy conferences, or anywhere that I'm vending stuff, have seen this. This is, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, so 18 times 4 is going to be 70. So there are 70 some models of nibs in there. My go-to nibs are about, I would say about 24 nibs that I like for different projects, different sort of things. Certain nibs work better on really rough paper, certain nibs for certain X heights, certain nibs for certain scripts or certain variations. I think that's one of the things, like for an example of this would be like, for those people who really like, say, Mike Saul's like kind of a twister type of ornamental caps. Those are like the most ornamental, crazy caps, right? Like they're like the Spencerian caps that just wind over and over again, like 5 or 6 times on themselves, and they use a ton of ink. One of the challenges that people face doing something like that is just even holding enough ink on the nib to do it, right? And so, something like those spear nibs that I showed you earlier with the multiple holes in them, or I guess I'll show you it again over here. Something like that is going to hold, just a ton of ink, and they're very, very flexible. So, so one of the reasons I like vintage stuff is because there is so much variety, right? Just on that one sheet that I showed earlier, which was the Esterbrook product line, and it's actually still incomplete. That's just the Esterbrook stuff. Here's one card of the Spencerian stuff. I couldn't fit everything onto this table. I didn't want to overwhelm everybody, but like if you think about this, something like that one line, the number of nibs there is pretty much the entire lineup of everything modern that's being made, right? Yeah. And like that seems so boring to me compared to the, I like having, like, why would you not want thousands of choices.
And I've got a few minutes more. And the thing about having thousands of choices, I can answer that question personally, it's very overwhelming to try and actually, I don't have a scientific mind. So I would love your best tips on how to record, or what do you do to track how,
so
yeah.
So there was a time, and I'll show you that the
You'll know.
depths of obsession here. There was a time when I was creating these, and so I have two of them down here, but these are my nib records. And so what I was doing was I was cataloging every single nib, one of each, using these coin collector cards like this. And I don't know if it's still in here because I dug these out because I hadn't touched them in like 2 years. But there was a time when I was writing, Sphinx of Black Quartz, Judge My Vow, with every single one of these nibs before putting them in there. And I have the sheets in here somewhere. They might not be in here, but I was doing that with all of them so that I would have an idea of how much it flexed and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay.
So, so you can do that if you wish, but I think in general what happens is that even though there are, when I was kind of joking when I said, like, why would you not want like thousands of choices? So it's true that there are thousands of different nibs made. However, you will find a huge majority of nibs fit into some basic sort of archetype of that sort of nib. And so you'll be able to tell, like, for example, I think nowadays almost everybody has gone over to the cylindrical barrel type of nib, which is what the maple pen that you showed me is. It's your average rounded looking nib, right?
Yeah.
That type of nib, of which there are thousands of, at that point, you're just looking at the shape of the eye hole, the length of the nib, and the length of the tines, basically, right? And you can very much narrow down how many choices there are, right? And that design is so prolific that you can find, if you wanted to, for example, right? Like, after this, shoot me your address. I will send you, I don't know, at least 6 nibs that I think are probably going to, they look almost exactly like your maple pen. You can try them all. And, and I'm actually pretty certain I know. I think I have one in mind that I think you will like a lot, that is also very flexible. But yeah.
I will do it justice.
So,
and on that happy note for me, we're at about an hour, so I'm just going to I haven't received a notification that it's shutting down. So anyone has any last minute questions for Nick, please send them through now. We'll wait for a couple minutes, and very kind gents get back to his day. Midday where you are.
I'm okay to answer. Like, there's nothing for me going on, so I actually didn't know that it was just going to be an hour. I thought it might be longer, because one of the things that I was gonna, well, here before we go, just because I haven't packed all this stuff, I think it'd be cool for you to see. These are gold nibs from the Victorian age, but like just the amount of engraving that they would do on these. And to give you an idea of how big that nib is. Yeah.
And do they would engrave that after the nib has been constructed, or?
Correct. Yeah. They were likely engraving it before slitting it. These are some exceptionally large holders that were mostly ornamental. And then here you can see that clearly the idea of having, these Spencerian, or the oblique idea, was already firmly ingrained a long time before. Actually, one of the really cool things that I was going to show you was that I really ended up. This is what stuff like this is what led to me liking fountain pens. So look, old holder, if you move that ring forward, you have a dip nib.
Oh.
But if you twist it, you have a pencil.
Huh. Oh.
And there are tons of variations of this sort of thing that are found in these sort of holders. You know, that this is another one. This is quite clever. So you twist, wait, let me mount this. So if you take this and you extend it, so that extends out, the telescopes out, that thing comes forward, and you have your dip nib at there. Wow. Or if you wanted to, you could retract the nib and you could twist this back, and you can see the pencil comes out of there.
That is
yeah.
Engineering.
So these are like kind of wild jewelers pieces that were being made in those days.
When would that have been? 1800s?
Yeah, 1800s.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of these really cool things were made around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for showing us. That you've got much more that you could show, but thank you for taking the time to have a chat with me and talk a little bit about antique nibs. We've really enjoyed it. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as well. And yeah, so just to let everyone know, they can get you at Entropy Inc.
Yeah.
You're also at _Nick P for all things fountain pens. Yeah, so hopefully people get in touch with you if they need something.
Yeah, I guess there's one last thing. Somebody mentioned that I only sell a couple models of nibs. Yes, that is what's listed on my website, but I haven't touched in like 3 years or something like that. I have at least 600 different models. So that's why I said like product photography just got out of control, because I did not want to have to sit there and try to photograph every single one of them. Especially when, you know, people are buying onesies and twosies of a lot of things.
Yeah,
exactly. And they might pain to have to deal with.
Yeah, I get it. So they can get in touch with you and you can give them some advice.
Yeah, get in touch with me. If you're never gonna see me at like a pen show or a calligraphy conference, then yeah, that's the best way to do it. If you are gonna see me at a pen show or calligraphy conference, then a lot of the times I have, you know, I bring no less than, you know, tens of thousands of nibs. So,
okay. Okay. Well, hopefully
there's a lot of stuff to try.
Hopefully there'll be a pen show near you sometime soon.
Yeah, we'll see how things go with this, but yeah, like you know, I'm really bummed that there's no international conference or AMPIT this year, but you know,
yeah, I'm sure.
Hopefully, yeah,
a lot of people.
But hopefully, yeah.
Europe. Thanks so much. Nick.
Yeah, of course. All right.
It was terrible. I'm sorry. So thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll let you know what's happening next at some point soon.
See you all. Bye.
Bye, Nick. Bye.